Please welcome our next Democratic nominee and our next President of the United States, former Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Please, thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Dave Loebsack. Iowa has been lucky to be represented by somebody like you in the United States Congress, and we need more like that in our nation's capital. This is important. Dave and his colleagues have passed legislation to raise wages, to deal with the cost of prescription drugs, to do things to keep our communities safe from gun violence. Unfortunately, that legislation is sitting in the Senate, waiting for action. And what would make all the difference in the world, besides, of course, a better Senate, would be presidential leadership focused on getting these things done, and that's what I'm here to offer. I'm going to be as brief as I can because I want us to make the most of the time for a conversation, but I'm here to share the values and the ideas that drive this campaign and some of the stories that help motivate me every day. And if you are a supporter of this campaign, I'm here to urge you to push through these next 2 weeks and make it possible for us to bring as many people as we can to the caucuses. In fact, let me ask all of our precinct captains to just put a hand up, or any of our precinct team members and precinct team leaders, because alongside our organizers, you're going to make all the difference. And I hope you'll get to know them later on if you decide to get more involved. And then for those of you who are making up your mind still, and I'm seeing everybody from folks who are just tuning in because you've just been busy or perhaps didn't think it was worth sorting through 25 candidates and wanted to wait till now when it got a little more focused, to the folks I met over the summer who said things like, "You're in my top 7, let's see how far this goes." I'm here to ask you to caucus for me on February 3rd and to share why it is that I believe we need to not only defeat this president, but defeat this president in a way that turns the page and brings us to a better day. Why we got to do that with a different approach and a different mentality than the one that got our country here in the first place. And to bring all of that into focus, let me start by asking you to form in your mind the image that centers my campaign. And it's of a day that is in our future, perhaps exactly 1 day from today, 1 year from today, which is the first time that the sun comes up over Muscatine, over America, and Donald Trump is no longer the president of the United States. Just let that image sink in. Aren't you ready to see that day come about? And I'm meeting a lot of Democrats for sure, a lot of independents, and quite a few what I like to call future former Republicans who share my enthusiasm for bringing that day about. Just because of the knowledge that no matter what party you're used to voting for, that right now parents are finding it difficult to look their kids in the eye and explain this president. So we know that we've got to bring about a change. And in order to do that, we're going to need a nominee who can cut through that noise machine that's been created, who can compete effectively against this president who, let's face it, could win again if we don't come at this the right way. And that's why the risk I believe we cannot afford to take is to adopt the same Washington-style mentality of political warfare that we've come to expect from our politics. That's why I think it wouldn't be a bad thing to send up somebody from the Midwest, somebody from an industrial community like the kind of places this president talks to. Maybe it would be a good idea to send up somebody who can call attention to the difference between serving when serving is asked of you and deciding the bone spurs prevent you from rendering service to your country. I won't be afraid to do that. But here's the truth. I actually think the best way to defeat this president is to be focused on what has to come next. In other words, that the same things that are going to make for good governing are going to make for good politics too. And so the real reason I'm asking you to picture that day is not just to give us something to look forward to. It's to think about what will be required of us on that day. It's not like all our problems melt away the moment we get a new and better president. On the contrary, we will need more from our presidency than we have in an awful long time. Think about it. We're going to be more divided than we are now. We are going to be polarized and torn up over politics and exhausted from fighting on that day. And also facing colossal issues that have only become more deep and more threatening in the months ahead. The sun that day will come up, but it will come up in a climate that is this close to the point of no return. It will come up in an economy where even when the Dow Jones and the GDP are looking good, I think an awful lot of us in our communities around the country are asking, when's that getting to our kitchen table? When's that actually going to make our lives better? The sun will be coming up over schools where kids are getting active shooter drills before they are old enough to learn how to read. That's what the next president's going to have to deal with. So you see what's going to be required. It's not just being able to beat this president and get a new and better one. It's going to be to unify our country and do it in a way that moves us forward quickly to getting big things done. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm asking for your support. It is about why we have a president. If it sounds like a tall order, it is, but that's why we as a nation created the presidency and invested it with the powers that we do. In other words, I'm running for the presidency because I believe that office of the presidency has a purpose. And the purpose of the presidency is not to glorify the president. It is to empower and unify the American people. That's why I'm asking for your support on February 3rd. Now, the biggest thing that I have taken away from my year campaigning across Iowa are stories that shed light on the values that I think this campaign and this country are all about. Something that we sometimes overlook in all of the cable and Twitter chatter over politics. It sometimes reduces this to a horse race or a game or a show. And it's not a show. It's our lives. That's how I come at this. As somebody who was leading a comparatively normal life as recently as maybe a year and a half ago, driving my Chevy to work. I'm not a millionaire. Somebody whose life has been also very much intimately shaped by the decisions made by political figures, whether it was the decision made in the White House that led to the orders that sent me overseas to war in Afghanistan, or whether it's the decisions around health care that have affected members of my immediate and extended family. Or the simple fact that my marriage, the most important thing in my life, exists by the grace of a single vote on the United States Supreme Court. And by the way, thank you, Iowa, for your hand in helping bring marriage equality to the land. So I came here ready to share my story, and of course what started happening was I began to hear yours. And it happens all the time, every day in different moments. Earlier in Keokuk, I met somebody who, I can go on for a long time geeking out on policy about things like SSDI and disability. But a gentleman stood up and explained exactly why this was so important. He was injured, terribly injured in a car accident. But that doesn't mean he can't work. And he wants to work. He does work, but he wants to work more. He wants to be able to be eligible for a promotion and to earn more and to contribute more in his workplace. But he can't because the system actually discourages that because of the way the cliffs work on things like SSDI. I'm seeing a lot of nodding like maybe he's not the only one who's dealt with this. Of course he isn't. This is something that is affecting not only his ability to be able to be fulfilled, but also the ability of anybody who might benefit from his contributions. I'm seeing these issues in our economy through the stories of people like a guy I met in Bettendorf, working full-time, good at his job, also driving for DoorDash because he says everybody needs to have a side job these days. Everybody needs to have a side job. As if we were living in a moment of national hardship and not a moment of economic growth and plenty as a nation. Shows you what it is we got to change and do differently and do better. But then I meet people whose stories also demonstrate what we're capable of as a country that would be so much better than where we are right now. People who already get it, even if it often feels like Washington doesn't. I'm thinking about folks like a young woman I met in Emmitsburg a few days ago. She is in high school, stood up, and she wanted to talk about what was going on at the border. I don't know if she's ever been anywhere near the border. But the reason she was asking was that she shared that her father had walked out on their family a couple years ago. And so she knows exactly what family separation means. Not in terms of policy terminology, but in terms of personal pain. And from that, she is able to extend her heart and her politics to somebody who couldn't be more different from her. A 5-year-old Salvadoran boy who has been torn out of the arms of his mother and has no idea why on the border of the United States right now, somewhere in Texas. She gets it. Americans already get it. Get it in ways that are so much more sophisticated than what you would think watching the news. A 10-year-old at an event we did a few days ago who came, I considered him very fashionable because he came in a blue tie and a white shirt and rolled up sleeves, ready to go. At his school, apparently, they have the office of mayor among the students, so he's the mayor of his school. And he gently pointed out to me that he was expecting to be alive in the year 2100 and would be kind of sitting in judgment of what we did now when it comes to getting the climate sorted out before it destroyed opportunities for him and his hoped-for children and grandchildren to be able to thrive. He understands at the age of 10 what we can't seem to get done on the floor of the Senate. And one more story I want to share with you about what's at stake in this campaign that I always think about when I think about Muscatine. And I'm going to put you in on the spot a little bit here, but my friend Bridget is here. She's here with her brother Sam and her parents Suzanne and Jeff. Suzanne, by the way, has volunteered, I believe, to be a precinct captain. So thank you for that. And I got to know Bridget when she came up to me at an event over the summer and said that our campaign had reached her and let her know that she could go to school and be who she is, talk about what she believes in, didn't have to be ashamed of having autism. And it was one of the moments in the story of this whole campaign that I thought, now we're getting somewhere. Because for her to know that she has nothing to be ashamed of in being herself will be a signal to others who she might even not see, but who will see her and know that they can be themselves too. And if we can create that sense of belonging in a campaign, months before the first vote is even cast, imagine what we can do with the powers of the presidency to make this country a better place to live in. Isn't that the right kind of direction that we need to be following as a country? So when I talk about politics and policy, when I talk about what we ought to do, the marginal tax rate on the highest income earners, or the strategy and the structure of my proposals on college affordability, or how we need to reconfigure the institutions that are handling immigration, or any of the things we got to do at the policy level in this country, and I expect we'll be able to dig into this in our conversation in a few moments, it all adds up to something bigger. It's the question of what is it like to be an American? What is it going to be like to be an American for the rest of the 21st century? Are we going to continue to be defined by exclusion, by fighting, by backsliding? Or are we going to get through the other side of the fighting to a moment where the American experience is defined not by exclusion but by belonging? That's what I believe we can do with the powers of the presidency in hand, and that's what I'm asking you to help me build. So I'll leave my introduction at that. Like I said, I want us to have as much of a conversation as possible. Are we doing microphones today, or folks? All right, great. So raise your hand, and a microphone will come to you. Somebody will hold it for you as you share your question. Yes, you're up first.
My name is Kristen, and I live on disability with my service dog, Paisley. And my biggest fear is that if something were to happen to my wife, what would happen to me? Because I could not live on what I get for disability.
Right.
But because of my health condition, I can't work.
Right.
So my question to you is, what can you do to help people like me live in less fear?
Well, you shouldn't have to have that kind of pressure. weighing on you. And again, this is part of why we've got to restructure the different benefit levels that come in with SSDI. For folks who are able to work and want to work, we've got to make sure there's no penalty for working more. For those who aren't, we've got to make sure that you're not in that condition of vulnerability. So it's things like that asset cap that is so low that it makes it almost impossible to qualify for the kind of benefits and support that would allow you to live well unless you spend into having virtually nothing left. It's why we need to make sure that we're supporting community efforts as well to build out belonging and build out the kinds of indirect supports that are so important, like transportation, making it easier to get around. It's why we need to make sure that medical expenses are affordable for everyone, because often it's Americans with disabilities who face the most crushing medical expenses, even when folks have coverage, very often. And this is part of what I believe we can deal with through what I'm calling Medicare for all who want it. That if you're on that plan or on another plan, we will make sure that there is a limit to how much things like prescription drugs costs can escalate and other costs of medical treatment. The bottom line is we need to make it more affordable to be an American right now. It's not just on the income side where we got to make sure that we improve what's going on with disability. It's on the cost side, whether we're talking about healthcare or housing or preparing for retirement or long-term care. All of these things are escalating out of control so that even when income does go up, it's not keeping up. And that's why we've got to have a bigger conversation about what we prioritize here in America and make sure we reprioritize in a way that doesn't have you wondering and worrying about how close you are to a situation that would be tough to get out of. Thanks. Yes, sir.
My name is Al Arola. My wife and I live in Muscatine. We moved here in 1971. Speculating or believing that you will be the nominee of the party, who can you envision as a running mate?
Great question. Well, I've tried to be careful not to say anything that would automatically rule anyone in or out, but let me say this. First of all, balance is going to be very important. Now, let's remember that when a candidate picks a running mate, that's not just a political decision. It's actually the first presidential decision you make, because in the event you get elected, the whole country has to live with that decision. So the first and most important criterion is who could lead this nation in the event that I were to be killed or unable to serve. It's a grave decision in that sense. The good news is there are a lot of fantastic leaders right now. Some of them are among my competitors, but some of them may not be household names right now. One of the benefits of being a mayor is you get to know some of the state and other leaders around the country who maybe aren't celebrated in Washington but are extremely capable, in addition to the more familiar faces that we have in federal leadership. I'll tell you the qualities I'll be looking for, whether it's in a running mate and a vice president or across the cabinet. First of all, like I said, balance. We need to make sure that our top leadership in this government reflects the country that we serve. That's why I've committed that our cabinet will be at least 50% women, because our country is, and we'll make better decisions. It's why it's so important to have racial and geographic diversity, diversity of experience and backgrounds. Again, not only because it's the right thing to do from a justice perspective, but because we will make better decisions. Another thing that's extremely important to me is truth-telling. So when somebody is in a position of trust or leadership, you need to have folks who will tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. It should be table stakes, but it's really important. And often I find that it's particularly important to not be the smartest person in the room for me. So finding people who are a step ahead of me on leadership or whatever issue they are in charge of will be important too. You should never be afraid, especially when you're making decisions, to not be the smartest person in the room. And often as a mayor, I've found that I've most earned my paychecks in moments where different people who I respected and trusted, who I considered smarter than me, could not agree among themselves on what to do. And that's why it's also so important across that truth-telling to have a commitment to the mission that we're all seeking to get to. Knowing that the toughest decisions are moments when there is no obvious choice. And there's no way to go down one course of action without some kind of harm that would come. And you have to weigh it against the risks or the harms of the other course of action. This is why we have human beings in these positions of trust and authority in our country. And those are the qualities that I'll be looking for in order to help me lead and help our country move forward. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Henry Marquardt. Actually, I'm a county candidate for a county board. So,
Excellent.
Who having a good name on the top of the ticket is really important.
Yeah.
But I have a kind of a wonkish question. I teach public policy at a local university. So, one of your other Democratic candidates points out that in the last 10 years, 90% of the capital, business capital in this country, goes to 50 counties, roughly 1% of the counties in the United States. And you look at a map, it's, Seattle, San Francisco, Boston, New York corridor. It is not South Bend, it is not the Quad Cities. We can't create new jobs, we can't create new economic opportunities. We really are stuck with the economy we have unless we can reverse that flow of capital so that business capital is coming to South Bend, business capital is coming to the Quad Cities, it's coming to Sioux City. What's your plan for getting business capital to move back to like the Midwest so that we can develop new industries, new jobs, and improve the economy?
Well, you're exactly right. And communities from South Bend to the Quad Cities to Sioux City and in between can be extremely competitive, but aren't getting the capital for what to work with. Sometimes I've practically dragged venture capitalists to South Bend and shown them around, and they said, "Wait a minute, you got amazing fiber connectivity, and you got a good workforce, and you got a great location, and I can buy a 5-bedroom house for about what a parking space costs in Palo Alto. How did I not know about this?" Right? And say, "Well, that's the point." The geographic diversity that we need to build up in terms of business development is tremendous. We're also seeing a similar pattern racially speaking. Businesses led by, in particular by women, by African American and Latino entrepreneurs, dramatically less likely to get that capital that they need in order to form and grow. And they have the best track record of creating opportunities for employees who have been historically excluded. So we've got to do better in this. Now, the good news is there are steps we can take federally to improve that. Part of it is I'm proposing that we invest in regional innovation hubs. This means that we support the kind of technical assistance and the kind of regional coordination. As I'm sure you know, running for county office, we're still kind of learning how to partner with our neighbors sometimes. But we're going to rise and fall together as regions, right? When the competition is no longer the next county over, but some obscure, minor Chinese city of 6 million, right? We got to make sure that locally we can get our act together with our neighbors. And we'll make sure that we're funding and rewarding that kind of cooperation and helping communities get on the map with whatever is most distinctive for them. It's why I'm proposing that we co-invest when we have enterprise led by people who have been historically excluded, trying to correct what's going on in these credit and capital markets that overlook underrepresented, or you might better say underestimated, business leaders. And then we've got to make sure that we're cross-pollinating when there is a success in the heartland. Or in an underrepresented community, that we're sharing that. And that's where I think the departments of Commerce and the White House itself can do a better job of lifting up these success stories, because people need to hear something different from our local communities that have so much to offer but just can't get on the map. At the very moment when technology is actually making it possible for some of this work to be done from anywhere, which is exactly why we can be so competitive in the middle of the country, as long as we're keeping up on things like broadband, so that you can stay connected in. And making sure we have the basics, like health care, so that people can afford to comfortably know that they will have a good future, choosing to be in smaller communities and ones that are not among those handful of cities and counties that get almost all of the attention and almost all of the funding. So coming from where I come from, this will definitely be a priority for me in economic development strategy, and a lot of promise lies there.
Power of the federal government, which is the largest purchaser in the world, to kind of drive business or investment to the places that aren't getting it by, let's say, saying if you're going to get $1 billion contract, that 30% of it has to be done in Indiana or Illinois or Iowa or something. Would you use the federal purchasing power to help this?
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity just using the power of the taxpayer, whether it's with all of the areas where we have federal deposits and where banking has to report into the federal government to ask them to be more transparent about the demographics of who they're lending to. or whether it's making sure that our purchasing is reflected broadly. And again, this is especially important for lifting up minority and women-owned enterprise, but also from a regional perspective. We've definitely got to do more to insist that our taxpayer dollar goes in places that actually reflect the diversity and the range of our taxpayers who are paying into it to begin with. So thanks for lifting that up. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Joyce, and I believe that my Republican friends like Trump because of the economy, because I sure as hell can't think of any other reason.
Yeah.
How can you maintain our economy when everybody says there's going to be a recession every 8-9 years?
Yeah. Yeah, you know, we're probably in the 12th inning of this economy. And by the way, this is just to be clear, this is an economic recovery that began in 2009. I mean, President Obama came in, unemployment was at like 10%, right? So the last president gets unemployment from 10 to 5. New one comes in, gets it from 5 to 4. And he's like the rooster who thinks he made the sun come up in the morning. So first of all, we got to talk about the true story of this economy and how we got here, right? But we also got to ask, what does it mean to have a good economy? I think we're measuring the wrong things. Consider this. The gross domestic product today is going up. Life expectancy today in America is going down. Those two things are happening at the same time. That shouldn't even be possible. And it shows you that we got a problem in terms of all this prosperity actually getting to us. Again, it's not getting to all of the different regions of the country, and it's certainly not getting to people of different backgrounds in this country. And in order to fix that, I believe it starts by measuring the right things. So when I'm president, we're not going to measure the success of the economy in terms of the number one measure of how we're doing. It's not going to be based on the Dow Jones, whether the stock market's looking good. I'm sure that's pretty much the same thing as the economy too. If you got a building with your name on it in New York, but I don't. I'm looking at whether this is actually getting to us. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure the success of the economy by the income growth of the 90%. Because an economy that's actually reaching us in our pocketbooks, that's one that's actually working. And that bakes in things like unemployment and things like GDP growth, but we only claim a success if it's actually getting out to more of us. So this is a matter of asking, what do we expect our economy to do for us? How do we make sure the economy is working for us, not the other way around? And that's a matter of looking beyond the numbers that the president's beating his chest about and insisting that we actually deliver an economy where we can afford to thrive. And by the way, I believe passionately in making college more affordable. We got to make sure you can thrive whether you got a college degree or not in this country. And that's a matter of making sure that the cost of living is under control. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My name is Julie, and I'm a volunteer in Ankeny.
Wonderful.
And we've been volunteering in Ankeny since July, and we came up here to Muscatine to see our friends, Bridget and Suzanne. So you were a bonus that you were here.
That sounds about right.
And my kids have been very involved in your campaign as well, coming to org meetings and go canvassing with me and stuff. And so I just wanted to say thank you for being an inspiration to them and showing them, being a good role model and showing them what inclusion and belonging really means. And they've incorporated that in their classrooms and in their friend circles as well. So
thank you.
You're already having an impact.
Well,
So
thanks for spreading the word. Thanks for working so hard.
Yeah,
We're counting on that precinct organization.
So my question to you is, who were your political inspirations when you were growing up?
So I learned a lot from a lot of different people that I look to. Some of them you wouldn't hear much of, like local leaders who kept South Bend going while we were going through a really tough period that lasted decades after the factories closed. Some of them were American political figures. I grew up learning a lot about John F. Kennedy. And that idea of service. First of all, putting your money where your mouth is, serving in the military, but then calling everybody to find some way to serve. That idea of ask not what your country can do for you. We're about due for that kind of moment right now, especially with all the people who've been, I think, leaving service, dejected. That's why I believe in creating 1 million paid national service opportunities a year, voluntary national service volunteer opportunities for anybody who wants to be more involved. It's that ask not. I really admire a figure from South African history named Stephen Biko, who is not as much of a household name as Nelson Mandela, largely because he didn't survive. He was killed by the police as a young activist. He was a medical student and a leader in a movement called Black Consciousness that helped create kind of the cultural basis for the empowerment of Black South Africans. And the thing one thing that's extraordinary about him is he lived to be, I think, 27, and yet had so much impact. And a reminder that you don't always have to wait your turn in order to make a difference. Just as now, some of the stories I'm sharing with you that have filled me with hope come from people not yet even old enough to vote who are leading the way. And so those are a couple that I think about. But everywhere around me, I encounter people who, whether they're in a lofty political position or not, just illustrate what politics is really about, that it's about our lives. And whenever I see a reminder of that, it inspires me and it fills my sails. So thanks so much for spreading the word about this campaign and volunteering actively.
Hi, my name is Chris. I'm from Davenport.
Terrific.
I've seen you lots. And, I guess my question is, I don't mind paying taxes. I think a lot of the programs we have are important, and you have to pay taxes in order to have them. But my concern is, or my question is kind of like, how are you going to go about doing the taxes? Because, like, personally, I also am on disability, and then I got my IPERS early because I'm not old enough to get it yet. But I'm paying taxes on my IPERS, and I'm paying taxes on my disability, and I already paid taxes on it once before.
Right.
But then, so right now that's like really killing us. And then my husband's still working, and he's going to have to work forever because of my lack of income now. And then you sit here and you watch these companies who are not paying any taxes. And then the way that you bring in companies to areas is you entice them by saying you won't have to pay any taxes for 10 or 15 years. Right. So I guess overall, my question comes down to, how are you going to go about what's kind of like the tax plan or your way of attacking that? Yeah. But also at the same time keeping programs like, for example, our current infamous leader or lack of leader wants to get rid of or really reduce disability. So I really believe we need programs. So
of course, and we shouldn't have to choose between having decent programs and being in good shape fiscally for the future. I'm the youngest person running for president, and I'm old enough to remember Republicans saying that the deficit was important. But now, there's $1 trillion deficit under this president. And the reality is we can absolutely afford to maintain and grow these programs that are so important. Our campaign is proposing a lot. We do take care not to make promises we can't keep. That's why I try to target what we're doing with college affordability and ask that top income bracket to go ahead and pay their own tuition. Still wishing them well, just need them to cover their own tuition so we can save those dollars for other things. It's why we've designed a way to solve the healthcare issue that costs $1.5 trillion over a decade instead of 10 or 20 or 40, depending who you ask. But there's no way to get any of these things done at the end of the day without raising the revenue. Now, the fact that you and your husband sent more money to the United States Treasury last year, personally, than Amazon did on their billions of dollars in profits. I'm guessing your net income as a household was not in the billions last year, right? But you paid more than they did. Not in percent, in dollars, because they paid zero. Matter of fact, technically it's a negative tax rate. Same thing with Chevron, some of the most profitable and enormous companies in the world. Why? Because you and your husband don't have an army of lawyers figuring out how to park your income in the Cayman Islands or in other tax-sheltered books, and they do. And it shows you just how upside down our system has gotten to be. If corporations are paying their fair share, and the wealthiest among us are paying their fair share, we can absolutely fund all of the things we're talking about and reduce the deficit over time. I'm not talking about going back to some crazy high tax level. We don't even have to go back to the tax levels that we had in the 50s and 60s. Although it's worth pointing out that when we did have those tax levels, the economy was growing just fine. So this is not incompatible with growth either. This is just about things like rolling back the giant Trump corporate tax cut, rolling back these tax cuts on the very wealthiest, having better enforcement on the tax laws that are on the books, dealing with things like capital gains tax. The way it's set up, taxes work more heavily than it taxes wealth. If we sort that out and get that right, then we have the funding to do everything that we need without asking you to dip in even more on a fixed income. Trying to squeeze a household like yours is not the answer to funding the things that we've got to do on healthcare, on education, on infrastructure, you name it. If we ask and require corporations and the wealthiest to pay their fair share, there is more than enough to get all of these things done, and that'll be the philosophy behind my tax policy. Yes, sir. All right.
Yeah, a couple of things. I'm a writer from Davenport, and I've been reading your book, and I've really enjoyed it. I want to give you a lot of credit for the candor that you talked about, coming home from Afghanistan, having the first meal with your folks, your first date, things like that. You have a big heart and a really big brain. I think you're still the smartest guy in every room.
Thank you.
But I come from a family of teachers, and they just have a lot of concerns about their profession, and I'm not real confident in the current Secretary of Education or their programming. So I get beat up if I go home without asking you this question. What are your thoughts about the Department of Education?
Yeah. First of all, tell them help is on the way. First off, in the form of a Secretary of Education who actually supports teachers and believes in public education. And I'm not just saying this because I married a teacher, although that does mean I get an education about education just about every day. But it's about the knowledge that we've got to lift up this profession and make sure that we are supporting a line of work that is more than work. It's more than a job. I have seen firsthand from Chaston the extent to which teachers are now expected to dip into their own accounts to furnish their classrooms, expected to be counselors as well for their students, which I think they're happy to do up to some point, but you're not supposed to have to handle all of the mental health issues that students face. We need to not only get teachers mental health first aid training, but also give them a place to refer kids to when there is a problem. Otherwise, it's coming down on the schools. And there are even some in Washington who are proposing that teachers now turn into highly trained armed guards whenever there's a safety threat at the school, as if that's the solution. When the simple fact is the kinds of weaponry that I was trained to carry in Afghanistan have no business being sold anywhere near an American school in the first place. So most of my focus will be making sure we lift up the profession, that teachers are free to teach, that their job is not being automated away by an over-reliance on standardized testing, that we're actually paying teachers more, because it's such an important profession. In fact, I like to say if we honored our teachers a little more like soldiers and paid them a little more like doctors, our country would be a better place. And we've got to work with teachers, partner with educators who have this frontline experience to make the changes that we do know we need to make in our K-12 system to prepare students for the future, not just on the technology side. We know technologies are changing, and you need to be ready for that. But also remembering that we're not just educating workers, we're educating citizens. We're educating neighbors and friends and parents. And that's why things like social and emotional learning, civics and humanities are not a luxury, they're a necessity and should stand right alongside science and tech at school. And go Irish. All right. I just got the high sign that we're out of time for today, but I'm so thankful. All right, let's do one more. We can do one more. Yeah, all right. Yeah, veteran.
So I really appreciate, what you're doing for teachers. Yesterday was a new day for our family. My wife went to work and had training on how to apply tourniquets and patch bullet wounds. Now me, I'm a professional firefighter. I expect that training. My son was an FMF corpsman in Baghdad. He accepted that training. They sent him to the University of Southern California Trauma Center to learn how to do this. My wife's a teacher. She's a teacher. She cuts her she cuts her legs and she faints. She's a teacher.
Right.
She is not built to carry a gun. She's not, you know. Last month, we had hate material delivered throughout our neighborhood. You know, a church invited a Holocaust denier into our neighborhood. You know, and this is dangerous talk. You know, and as a minority, we can't have talk like that in this country. It's dangerous. And it's dangerous not to us, but to our children. Our children shouldn't have to listen to that bullshit freaking growing up. You know?
That's right.
You know, you know, I know you deployed, and I know your family, you know, what they went through. But now, my wife goes to work, and I get the same feelings as when my son's deployed. You know, and that's unfair. It's unfair to her, it's unfair to me, it's unfair to our family, it's unfair to our students, our community. You know, what can you do about that?
That's right.
You know, I'm scared.
Yeah. And this is the last thing you should have to worry about, or your kids should have to worry about, or your wife ought to worry about. I mean, you know, I gather you served in the military as well.
Three-generation veteran.
Wow.
My sons are the fourth. My sons are the fourth.
Oh.
You know, we serve.
Right.
You
and
know?
when you take up arms to serve the country, you are agreeing to focus on those things so that teachers and students here in the homeland
Yes.
don't have to.
Yes.
Right?
We're
Only to
there
know that we're
protect.
being threatened by hate coming into
Yes.
our communities. So to me, this is why this whole conversation is fundamentally a conversation about national security. Not only does national security mean that we've got to end endless wars and have the finest military in the world to make sure that we're ready for anything that might come our way, but also never ask them to go anywhere that's not necessary. But it starts right here at home. If we're serious about national security, that means doing something about guns. Look, this is a great example of what's wrong with our democracy. Most Republicans, most gun owners, not to mention independents and Democrats, think we ought to at least be doing things like background checks and red flag laws to keep our country safe. It's Washington that won't do it. We got to make sure when there's a majority among the American people, that starts being reflected by a majority on the floor of the Senate. And presidential leadership can make all the difference in the world in getting that done. But I think it even goes deeper than that. To me, and what happened, unfortunately, in your community is an example of what we're up against. We got to realize that our country is made unsafe for everybody when anybody is targeted for harm or targeted for hate. If we're serious about the idea of patriotism and loving our country and keeping our country safe, then it begins with the understanding that our country is people. And you cannot fully love a country if you hate half of the people in it. It is only hate that doesn't belong in the United States of America. And as president, I'll send that message far and wide. So you see what's at stake right now. You see what we're up against. You see what we are dealing with that is tearing the very fabric of our country. But I'm actually filled with hope. I couldn't be doing this if I wasn't. And I imagine whether you think of it this way or not, you are too, or you wouldn't have come here. You have been propelled into this room by some sense of hope. And I know that the word hope fell out of fashion in our political vocabulary for very understandable reasons, because of what we're up against and what we're seeing and the bleakness of this moment in our politics. But I also insist that hope is what makes it possible to be involved at all. So think of it this way. On the news, they took the word hopeful, turned it into a noun, and used it as another word for candidate. Have you noticed that? I'm a hopeful. That's what I'm doing here. To me, that is proof that running for office is an act of hope. And so is helping somebody run for office. So is volunteering, being a precinct leader, caucusing and voting to begin with. That is an expression of hope. And what I'm looking for you to do is to reach out to those in your life who maybe are this close to just giving into the exhaustion that we feel from watching what's going on the news, and deciding instead to respond to it with action. That 2020 is our chance. No matter what happens on the floor of the Senate, impeachment, all the other nonsense that's going on, whether it's the Republican senators telling us that they're just going to treat impeachment like a foregone conclusion, or the refusal of the Senate to do anything about common sense gun laws, or a president who doesn't seem to understand how to send a message that hate has no home in the United States of America. If that is exhausting, if that is dispiriting, if that is putting pressure on your sense of optimism about our country, this is when it's up to us. This is when we get to change all of that. And it starts right here in Iowa. a state that has made history time and time again. I was here as a volunteer knocking on doors 12 years ago when your state made history and changed what people thought was possible by allowing a most unlikely young man with a funny name to get on the path to the nomination. You made history once again when it proved to be right here in the American heartland that the freedom to marry arrived and then was extended all the way to where it could reach me in Indiana a few years later. Right here in Iowa. So, let's make history in 2020 and put ourselves in a position where all of the things we're up against, all of the fears that we've been forced to confront, turn into something we could actually be proud of. That we could look back in 2020, look into the eyes of our kids that we're having trouble explaining this moment to, and tell them, I'm sorry it ever got that bad, but look at what we did in 2020 to start to make it better. Are you ready to help me make that a reality for our country? Are you ready to make history? Are you ready for that day the sun comes up over Muscatine and our new future begins? Let's go out there and do it together. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring. And I will see you on caucus night. Thank you. Thank you.